Thank you for watching. My name's Glenn Morgan, and welcome back to another episode of We the Governed, talking about the Pacific Northwest today, and what could be more Pacific Northwest than the city of Seattle, which really brings us to the recent mayoral election, where Katie Wilson here, an avowed and open socialist, was recently elected to the Seattle mayor, and she'll be running the city next year. And there's, of course, a lot of news and attention that's been given to her recent political success. You hear a variety of people talking about socialism in Seattle. Is Seattle going socialist? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. And of course, a variety of just articles and stories out there that people are panicking about. The new socialist mayor of Seattle, who's openly socialist, unlike some of the past mayors who just were socialists and didn't admit it. And what happens next? And can she really destroy Seattle? And how quickly can she do it? This is a good question to get into. But before we do, just a quick reminder, if you haven't hit the like and subscribe button down below, please do so as soon as possible. It doesn't cost you anything except for a few seconds of your time, and it does help us get our videos out there to a wider audience. The more people who subscribe and hit the like button and share this video with others, it really does help get our story and our videos out to a larger audience. So now let's get back to the mayor of Seattle, who recently, mayor-elect of Seattle, Katie Wilson, who certainly is just chomping at the bit and eager to get her hands on anybody's cash that she can to justify and hopefully achieve the utopian scheme that she has for the Emerald City. It's kind of ironic. I mean, just, if you look at it, of course, Seattle, one of the tourist attractions in Seattle, downtown, of course, is a great big 10-foot statue of Lenin in Fremont. And of course, no place says Comrade Katie better than any promotional videos or photos that she may have in front of the statue of one of her mentors, Lenin himself. Now, of course, it's oftentimes in the recent stories that's coming out, they're comparing New York to Seattle, who's going to be the craziest socialist of all, and that's not exactly the optimal thing that you're going to want to be talking about when you actually want to have a city left to live in when somebody like this is done with it. But these are basically the stories that are coming out about our new mayor of Seattle. Now, it's important because Seattle's one of the biggest cities in Washington state. We do care about it because, after all, it is the biggest city here. It has the biggest voting bloc by geographic location, and it has a tremendous influence on the rest of the state. Many of you know the history of my family. When my great-great-grandmother helped found Pike Place Market in Seattle, and even though I've never lived there myself, I spent plenty of time there growing up, visiting family, visiting friends, and driving through it, and stuck in traffic jams, and going to occasional events there, even recently with my kids, as dangerous as Seattle's become and as dirty and messy as it's become. Nevertheless, it does matter to the rest of the state of Washington what happens in Seattle, because nothing just stays there. It spreads like a disease and goes elsewhere. And so bad political ideas in Seattle are not good for the rest of the state or the rest of the country. But the one thing I want to talk about is that sometimes people tend to exaggerate or panic when it comes to how fast somebody can actually destroy a city or a state or a nation with socialism or with any other bad political issues. And the one thing I always have to try to bring myself back to is a little bit of historical perspective here. And there's, in addition to the 10-foot statue of Lenin downtown Seattle right now in Fremont, there is a statue actually of Adam Smith, quite a bit different person, who wrote Wealth of Nations and is oftentimes considered to be the opposite of Karl Marx in a lot of ways in explaining how markets work and the nature of man. And this statue of him is in Scotland, and it's much more recent. It was put up actually not that long ago in Scotland. And there's a kind of a quote that he has, and it was actually a quote that comes from during the time of the American Revolution. And there was a British member of Parliament named John Sinclair who actually wrote a letter to Adam Smith concerned about the ruin of England that was happening because of the American Revolution. And there's no doubt there was a lot of damage done to England as a result of the American successful revolution, thank God. However, his response was pretty interesting. And one of the things Adam Smith pointed out was, he said, "Be assured, my young friend, there's a great deal of ruin in a nation." And what he's really saying there is that it takes a lot of work for even the most corrupt, incompetent, and destructive politicians and political people, and blunders and chaos that they tend to have. It takes a lot for them to completely destroy a country. Unfortunately, a country is usually there's a lot of strength in the people and the nation and all that. It takes quite a bit to completely collapse it. So this idea of there's great ruin in a nation, I always thought it was a practical analysis of the ability of a country or a city or other places to come back from setbacks that they get with a terrible elected person. Now, Katie Wilson, obviously, she's never held a real job before. This is really going to be her first high-paid job where she didn't have to depend on her parents. Although she is 43, she's had plenty of time to potentially get real jobs. Her last significant job here was really running the Transit Riders Union, which, of course, was very harmful to Seattle and destructive to the future of that city as well. But she certainly does know how to make things even worse if she wants to. And of course, a lot of people from the outside looking in are going to be wondering, what exactly is Katie's vision for Seattle at the end of the day? I mean, she has these utopian socialistic schemes in her mind, and wherever she absorbed these from her, probably from her various professors or her parents at some point in time. But is she going to try to do this to Seattle? Well, the reality is, even if she wants to do that, it takes some time, even for a socialist, to get to the point where they completely destroy Seattle. Even Detroit somehow still exists after all these years, and Baltimore after all these years of Democrat Party socialist rule. So it just takes a lot of work to completely destroy a city. So I don't think anybody who's out there planning to observe the total destruction and collapse of Seattle in the next few months, I think they're going to probably be disappointed, because it just doesn't happen that quickly. The reality is it takes quite a long time to get to whatever the final endpoint of that socialist vision of the city and whatever it might be. Now, of course, rarely does a socialist ever admit that they're going to fail or recognize that they're going to fail, but it is worth kind of looking at exactly what are the steps that Katie can take here to destroy Seattle. This is important to just understand, because just because somebody comes up there and spouts a lot of socialistic ideas, that doesn't mean that they're going to be any more impactful than their worthless professor at the University of Washington. Now, one thing she can do to definitely hurt the city of Seattle is increase crime. And her very pro-crime background and pro-criminal behavior, and the recent election of a pro-criminal Seattle attorney, probably inspires us to think that this may be one of her platforms. It isn't the platform she specifically ran on, but it seems to be an inevitable platform of the policy she plans to implement. So increasing crime, making Seattle a lot less safe, this seems to be part of her objective and plan. As part of that plan, she wants to increase the drug use and the homelessness that and kind of the general chaos that we find all over Seattle today. This will definitely help with the primary platform there of increasing crime in the area, because when you import as many drug addicts and so-called homelessness people as you possibly can into the city, the inevitable just proliferation of crime is just going to expand. Of course, you got to pay for all these dreams and schemes with more money, other people's money that you need to take without taking a pay cut yourself, of course, and that means you're going to have to increase taxes. Unfortunately for her, the Lafleur curve has been impacted in Seattle, and the more taxes are unlikely to generate the additional revenue and basically acquisition of money that she thinks she's going to get with, partially because already Seattle is on a trajectory where they're chasing away businesses and jobs, and the election of Katie Wilson is likely to just encourage that to continue. And then finally, in order to really maintain the socialist utopian, glide path that she wants to be on, you have to increase the corruption and conceal the fraud. And this is basically the platform that she'll have to basically follow if she wants to destroy Seattle. And, listen, she's got a lot of people on whose shoulders she stands in order to take advantage of their past disasters and behavior as well. Seattle has no shortage of horrific politicians and mayors, whether they be child molesters or just incompetent clowns or people that can't tell the difference between a riot and a summer of love, or people who just want general chaos and destruction wherever they go. Regardless of who these people are, this is who's been running Seattle for decades now. So really, they've laid a really perfect platform for Katie to come in here and really just do that final, slam down and demonstrate the perfect utopian awesomeness of socialism in the Seattle world. And there's a lot to say. I mean, socialism really does leave a lot of memories behind, a lot of visions of course, the dreams are never quite the reality, but this is what socialism ends up providing for the people who live in it. And the real question is, if this is her plan and dream, which there's no reason for us to believe that she's just lying or that she's lied her whole life, she does want to implement some kind of a socialist agenda. What actually stands in her way? And I think this is important because obviously the Republicans can't really do anything to stop Katie. The rule of law isn't really going to stop her. It's not like we have real judges in Washington state. They may occasionally remember what the law means. Sometimes they might have even read the state constitution. But for the most part, when you look at how Washington state judges have ruled recently, those are like distant memories and bare suggestions based on how they'll look at things. So the real question then is, what really stands in the way of Comrade Wilson's socialist visions for Seattle? Number one, actually, is this bloat and inertia of bureaucracy. No matter how much you want to destroy the city that you're taking over, you're still going to have to kind of manage this real large, thousands of bureaucrats, programs and operations and fiefdoms and incompetence and corruption that just comes hand in hand with the whole thing, and getting that ship to follow your lead. And this is particularly true when you've never had a real job before, so you don't really know what it means. The bloated bureaucracy, even if politically they're aligned with her, it just takes a while to clean house and get them out of your way so you can implement your plans, really. It will be an obstacle for her. Secondly, you're going to see an exodus of competence and money out of Seattle, which doesn't make the job any easier. She's already made these announcements that she plans to hire probably the least qualified people that she can find in the city because she doesn't care about their qualifications. She's just looking at some intersectionality definition of where they fall out on the pronoun spectrum as to who she's going to put in charge of each position. And I'm sure she'll follow through with her DEI sort of operation, but that's not going to be it's not going to necessarily produce a high degree of competency, and you're going to be running out of money to pay them what, of course, you want to. Second, the other next thing, of course, is just this human nature and reality. This is usually the death knell for most socialist experiments. Eventually, you do run into reality and human nature. Of course, this was one of Marx's key failings, and along with Rousseau. They never really did understand the nature of man, and so that the blind spot that they have when it comes to understanding the nature of man usually means that socialism produces the self-destruct in the end anyway. And then, of course, there's going to be the scandals, the fraud, and the drama that always come with any kind of experiment in the socialist world. And that sort of stuff tends to pop up, and it becomes very distracting. Because remember, one of the things that socialism absolutely requires, and anybody on the leftist side of the political spectrum, you can see this. Narrative is the most important thing. Truth is totally irrelevant. Reality is irrelevant. But narrative is everything. It's one of the reasons why they love censorship and why they have to utterly crush. They may love criminals. They may not care about violent crime, but they do have to crush their political opposition, because anything that exposes the truth about their worldview and what's going on, that is catastrophic, because the narrative is everything. And if you understand that about socialists, you'll understand about the inevitable Wilson, mayoral sort of operation. And of course, this hubris that's pumped up a little bit in the media as well. It's always the enemy of socialism, thinking that somehow this time it's going to be different. Somehow you'll be able to achieve what nobody in the history of man ever has, and you're going to implement your socialist vision, and it'll fail like everything else always has. And of course, whenever we see the reality of socialism in action, it's usually pretty ugly. And it's not something that most people would really look at and say, man, that is living the dream and that's where I want to be. It's one of the reasons why people always flee countries that implement socialism. Now, obviously, just from a personal standpoint, this is the greatest job that she's ever had. We've seen this with a lot of socialists who get into government jobs, especially high-paid and overpaid positions, like the mayor of Seattle's position. So for the first time, she's not going to have to depend on her parents' money, and she's going to want to do anything and everything she can do to basically hold on to this job. So if the job gets put at risk in some way, she could back off of some of her socialist schemes, if for no other reason than to kind of hold on to this, really the first time in her life having a real job. Now, no matter what she wants to do with her virtue signaling and pretense, it's going to be very difficult for her to pretend that something's not happening in Seattle. And of course, this is mainly if we let her get away with that. So just because she paints Lennon green, right, doesn't prove that he's good for the environment, no matter how much she thinks it does. And one of the things, of course, that's also going to inevitably happen, just like it's already happened under the previous administration here in Seattle, is that when you get goofy people like this, they really become almost the perfect poster child and advertisement for Bellevue, right across the lake. A lot of businesses have moved out of Seattle for good reason. They've moved into Bellevue where they can operate a lot more efficiently, a lot more effectively. And of course, it's one of the reasons why socialism never stays confined to the jurisdiction in which it starts to ruin a community, because the narrative begins to collapse because people escape. They go to a nearby city, nearby county, nearby state, and they're escaping the destruction and harm and self-implosion of socialism, and socialism can't allow that, and so they expand their socialist ideas into these nearby cities. This will be pretty much the big fight that comes up right now, but until then, you're going to see all these businesses trying to pull themselves out of Seattle, and it's pretty easy just to move across the lake in maybe Kirkland or just some other environment where they can actually run a business without it probably being stolen from them or completely destroyed by the Seattle crime wave. Now, again, I'm going back to this comment from Adam Smith earlier. There is a great deal of ruin in a nation, even in a place like Seattle, where you've had decades of ruin and political incompetence and disasters. The overall economic situation has not been that bad. And so as things start to change, obviously, you already have about a 30% vacancy rate in commercial structures. That's usually a pretty good indicator of where things are going economically in the city. But there's still a bit of denial of reality, and that's going to go on for quite some time still. The question, of course, is how long, and I would guess that it's going to take a few years before you really see the significant impacts of the Wilson administration on the people of Seattle. Now, let's just think through this, because if you really want to try socialism super hard and super fast, and maybe she's really willing to go quite that aggressive down the road, number one, she's going to have to pretend that the crime isn't real, or that it really doesn't mean anything, or that they're just misunderstood people. And drive-by shootings and drug cartel activity and human trafficking and rapes and murders, those really just look the other way, pretend like they didn't happen, downgrade your crime stats. This is a key piece of the Wilson administration. They're going to have to implement some version of this as quickly as possible, and that's probably the only way that if she was going to really hammer hard on this, she's going to try to do that. For sure, she's going to have this desperate grasp for cash, whatever cash she can grab, because they're running out of it, and there's not going to be enough people there. And the more desperate she gets to grab that cash, the more people flee. And so it's going to become kind of a downward spiral in their budgeting. And of course, they waste and they lose a lot of their money. A lot of it gets stolen. Fraud is going to always be part of the landscape here. And so it's going to be very difficult for them to really hold on to whatever tax dollars they've acquired. It's just going to get squandered and wasted. And so a lot of the dreams and schemes they have probably can't be funded. As part of this operation, you need to recruit and attract illegals and criminals and druggies, and you got to call it an excellent opportunity, call yourself a sanctuary state for druggies and criminals and cartel members and sex trafficking rings, whatever it is that she's trying to bring in here. Now, this gives her the double bonus of bringing in a bunch of new voters, chasing out a bunch of voters that probably wouldn't vote for her in the first place. And this helps her cement political power because she needs to hold on to her job because, again, it's the first real job that she's ever had. And then the primary and, again, the dominant thing that we've seen in the Democrat Party for the last 8 years, always blame Donald Trump for everything. Wilson will do the same thing, just like Bob Ferguson, just like every Democrat in Washington state. They'll blame Donald Trump for pretty much everything that's going wrong. And that's another great way of using some camouflage to cover up your own incompetence and disasters. And that's what we're going to see. Now, the question is, what can you do? All this is going on, and it's easy for people to feel helpless and not know what to do. Well, one of the things I always say first is if you are in a situation where you're going to be potentially impacted by a socialist, take logical and obvious precautions to protect yourself and your family. Socialism always brings great misery and destruction with it. So if you have a way to insulate your family a bit from that, that's a good plan. Help document the Seattle experiment. Now, this is a big benefit to everyone else who lives in Washington state as well as in other states because socialism only exists because you get a false narrative. You have to protect and create this utopian lie and convince other people to buy into it. And one of the things that's very inconvenient is when the lie falls apart, the narrative is hard to maintain. So you and I should be part of exposing and documenting the failures, inevitably, that occur in Seattle as they've been occurring for quite some time. And of course, we have to be willing to expose the truth and ignore this kind of false, gaslighting, fake narrative that inevitably it's going to be produced by the Seattle Times and whatever other mainstream media that's been sold their souls or been bought by the government to kind of just hide what's actually going on. And then what we need to do is continuously and endlessly share this with others so it becomes a warning. All these people that move into Idaho and Texas and want to bring these dumb, bad ideas with them, it's very important for us to expose what we're actually fighting and what we're against when we're in places like Seattle or King County or Washington State or Oregon or California or any place like this where socialists want to try their hands. New York, Minnesota, wherever it is that they feel like they've got an opportunity to try their utopian experiment once again, because this time it'll be different. It's up to us to expose exactly how it's not different. It's the same thing over and over again with different names and different faces, but the same kind of mess that it's always become. And this is important because every generation seems to be demanding that they learn through the destruction of their own communities the joys and wonders of socialism for themselves. However, sometimes, unfortunately, if it's not that easy to save a city, you have to put it under a spotlight so that you can recognize that the fate is really just there to serve as a warning to others on what not to do. And sometimes that's just the way things are. We may very well be in a short-term window of time like this with Wilson, where despite the utopian dreams and schemes that she has, the joys and wonders of socialism in action in Seattle, it'll help serve as a warning to others. Number one, perhaps we can help save other communities so they don't have to go down the same self-destructive path that Seattle's apparently on the way towards. Also, so that as people begin to realize they don't have to destroy themselves for whatever socialist dream schemes get thrown at them by the latest crackpot politician that shows up, and so that it gives us a place to start once they've hit rock bottom and rebuild back up. Adam Smith said there's great ruin in a nation, and there is. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to destroy a nation or a state or a city as much as the Democrats and the socialists seem to want to do that. We just have to do our best to expose the truth and recognize that these ideas are terrible. You're universally failed and destructive wherever they show up. And if Seattle's going to go down that road, if Wilson's going to be successful and trying socialism harder than ever this time, we need to be there to document it and protect everybody else from going down the same road. So that's something that we can do, but I can tell you that you only get into this position after decades and decades of a lot of people over the years, generations ago, failing to show up and nip it in the bud and stop it from getting this far. But it's gone this far in Seattle, and it's going to be up to us ultimately to have to clean up the mess and watch the disaster as it unfolds. But it will be a slow motion disaster. It will not happen instantly overnight. I believe it'll take a couple years before you really see the effects of it. So that's where we're at. That's what's going on right now. And just remember that if you don't want this to happen where you live, you better be willing to show up. Because, as I always say, the future belongs to those who show up.